For the next step in the assembly process, we're going to need two 8mm by 500mm linear rods. We're going to need two NEMA 17 stepper motors with a standard 5mm output shaft. We're going to need a left and a right printed XY motor mount for the Hypercube 300. We're going to need 3 of the regular Y-axis rod mounts, and we're going to need 1 of the left side Y-axis rod mounts. We're also going to need M5 by 10 screws, M3 by 10 screws, and 2020 hammer nuts. And of course, the frame that we've built so far. The first thing we're going to need to do is trim our 500mm Y-axis rods by marking them so they're just shorter than the 440mm extrusions on the left and right sides of the frame. Now, if you can find 8mm rods that are trimmed to size, that would be fantastic. Just order them at 440mm. But I've only been able to find them in 50mm increments. And honestly, this 500mm unit was a lot less expensive than buying something at 450mm. I don't know why they charge you more money to make something a little bit shorter. But anyway, 500mm rods is kind of the most cost-effective quality component that I've been able to find. And I put a mark right here at just under 440mm. Now keep in mind, we're going to be inserting these Y-axis rod mounts on here, and it's going to push through all the way one side and mount over here. Another of the Y-axis rod mounts, we're going to scoot it past where it needs to be. So the rod needs to actually be just a little bit shorter than 440mm in order to fit here. So don't cut it exact, you're going to have a heck of a time getting that thing to fit in there. I normally cut them somewhere around 435 to 438mm, and that works great. Go ahead and do that to both sides. I've cut my Y-axis rods now, and if you check their fit, you will see that they go right in between and have a couple millimeters of looseness. And that's exactly what you want in order to be able to get these fitted properly. The next thing we're going to do is mount up our Y-axis rod mounts. And to do that, you're going to need a couple of M5 by 10 screws and a couple of T-nuts. And what we're going to do is pass them through and install the T-nuts in place. And you're going to go ahead and do that to the 3 that are the standard shape, kind of like this guy right here. Okay, what we're going to do next is take your X and Y motor mounts, and you're going to pass the 5mm by 10 nuts through and mount the T-nuts on the back of them. And you're going to do the same thing with all of the Y rod mounts. So you're going to pass M5 by 10 screws and attach the hammer nuts or T-nuts behind them. You'll notice that there's one that's a little bit funny looking, and it's got the skinny little tab on it. That actually is used with a special left side motor mount that has a matching little recessed area in it. And the way that gets assembled is you take this and you push it through this way, so it goes like that. And once you have that, we're going to pass our M5 by 10 screw through that and kind of pre-assemble the works here so that we have a T-nut threaded onto it, like so. And this is the assembly. Once you line them all up, that's going to go right here. And if you push it up so that this left side Y rod mount is pushed against the bottom of your 20mm angle bracket, everything will line up and stack up to the right height. So go ahead and tighten these down. While you do this, you want to kind of make sure it's being pushed this way, and then you're holding it tight against the extrusion in the other direction. And we're going to actually crank these down tight because they're not going to go anywhere. This is going to be exactly where we want these to be. Okay, and there's another M5 by 10 screw immediately above the first one. We're going to crank that one down too. And then finally the top one that's exposed here. There we go. Over on the other side, we're going to take one of the regular mounts and install it first, like so. And what you're going to want to do is just kind of very, very lightly mount this one in place. So loosen it and then tighten it back, or turn it counterclockwise and then turn it clockwise a little bit. And just get it so it just starts to tighten down, and no tighter than that. So we've mounted the front ones. Okay, there is one component that I forgot to put up at the start of this video, and that's going to be an LM8 LUU linear bearing. That's the linear bearing that's going to slide back and forth on this. And now is the time to mount that. So, pardon me while I run to the garage and get those bearings. This is an LM8 UU bearing, and this is an LM8 LUU bearing. It's a little bit longer, almost exactly twice the length of the standard LM8 UU bearing, and it's actually used to support the X carriage, which we're going to be assembling in the next video. It is much easier to slide this in place right now when we're fitting this rod, rather than to put it in place and then try to get this apart and then put this back on there at a later time. So the first thing we're going to need to do is take all of these, and then before you install anything, make sure that you can push the rod all the way through. They're going to be a nice tight fit because you don't want this to be loose at all. There's actually M3 size screws that are 2.9 millimeter that should for some reason this ever get loose, you can put a set screw or an M3 by 6 screw into these corners to tighten them up. But I've found that literally in every build I've done so far, it's not been necessary to do it. So what we're going to do is we're going to push this through so the rod's sticking all the way through the other side. And again, with the LM8 LUU bearing in place, we're going to push this in. And remember, we cut the rod a little bit short, so we're able to have it, kind of tip in place. And once it's there, we're going to align our Z-nuts or T-nuts so that they fit properly and can push in. And then finally, once we've got it in place, we're going to push it all the way in so that it seats against the extrusion properly, and then tighten it in place. Now this, we're just going to snug down very gently again, kind of like we did with the same part in the other corner over here. We don't want to tighten this enough that the T-nuts start kind of grabbing into the extrusion, and its serrations biting into it and kind of permanently locking that in place. Alright, so now we have that. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. The last component we're going to assemble in this video is we're going to attach the right motor mount, the right XY motor mount over on the right side of the frame. On this one, we just have two M5 by 10 screws with T-nuts installed, and unlike the other one that sits a little bit higher because of this special Y-axis rod mount, this one butts right up against the bottom of a standard Y-axis rod mount. And we're going to slide that right into place here, hold it right up against the extrusion, and screw this tightly in place. Now the reason why the machine isn't symmetrical is because the belts for the Core XY mechanism actually run on different planes. So one belt runs a little bit higher than the other, and that's why these motor mounts and the eventual location for the pulleys that mount onto the Core XY motors is a little tiny bit different. So they're on slightly different levels. And these particular parts, we can really crank these down because they don't need to get adjusted or moved anywhere. The last thing we're going to need to do now is grab 4 more M5x10 screws and T-nuts, and we're going to push them through the opening in the motor mounts to finish securing them in place. One goes in just like that, and another one goes in the same slot in the middle but goes up like this. And get these nice and tight. Now the last step that we'll do in this video is install our XY motors. And to do that, we're going to need some M3x10 screws. And we're going to pass them through the top while we push the motors up. Now, as we do this, we're going to want the wires to actually come forward on the motor, so towards the front of the assembly or the assembled machine, and the motor presses right into the motor mount like so, so that it is kind of keyed in place and located by the center opening, and it's a tight fit. And we're going to pass the screw right in from the top and screw that in place. So we're going to put 3 more screws here, mount the motor on the other side, drop the 4 screws through the top of that. I've turned the printer 90 degrees so the front of it is facing the camera, so you can get a good look at the way that the motors are mounted. So we have our right and left Core XY motors, and they're mounted so that the wires are coming straight out the front. And what we're going to do when we wire this printer is actually run them through the extrusion so they're hidden. We're going to be able to hide a majority of the wires, so it's going to be a really nice and clean installation here. Okay, that's going to wrap it up for this video. In our next installment, we're going to be mounting the Core XY carriages, and we're going to be installing the idler pulley bearings that go in here, the carbon rods, and assembling the X carriage that fits in the center, so the part that actually holds the hot end and everything else like that. It's starting to look like a printer, isn't it? Alright, we'll see you next time.